And from Jerusalem, we're in the company of correspondent Irris Makler, and from London, Yossi Mekelberg, Associate Fellow at the Chatham House think tank. Thanks for joining us here on France 24. Let's begin with you, Irris, and the latest on what happened in Tel Aviv. 9 injured is the toll, we're told.
That's right. I can tell you because I've seen footage now of the actual attack that the assailant did drive up to the bus stop, rammed into it, got out from the window and armed with a knife tried to attack people who were actually sitting at a cafe nearby, till someone who observed him realised that this was an attack. At first he thought it was just road rage and an accident, and then because he was armed he managed to shoot that attacker, and 4 of the people who were injured are seriously injured, and they are now being treated in a hospital in Tel Aviv.
The assailant, a West Bank resident.
Yes, there was initially some report that he had a permit to be inside Israel, but that now appears not to be true. The Shin Bet has confirmed that he was from the occupied West Bank, but had no permit to be in Israel at that time. So someone from the south of the West Bank, was he influenced by the events in Jenin? We don't know. We do know that the Hamas militant group and Islamic Jihad actually have made that link. And we heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu, who spoke within the last couple of hours on a visit to soldiers not far from Jenin. And he said there is no link. If you think that you are making that link and you will put us off, you won't. And he also said there will be more operations like this in Jenin. This is not the only one.
Yeah, and this, and I'll put it to you, Yossi Mekelberg, follows what now seems to be a pattern. When you had that Israeli helicopter gunship in the Jenin camp last month, it was quickly followed by an attack on West Bank settlers at a restaurant and gas station. This operation is due to continue for a few more days. Your thoughts on this tit for tat?
I think those are terrible tragedies, and it epitomizes the tragedy of this entire conflict of tit for tat and cycle of violence, endless one, and with no political horizon. At the end of the day, there is no military solution and shouldn't be a military solution for this conflict, just a political and diplomatic one, which will bring the two people to sit to the negotiation table and once and for all to resolve the outstanding issues between them, which would recognize also the Palestinian side of self-determination and occupation, and ensure that there is security for every human being, be it Israeli or Palestinian, between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. Otherwise, we see it. It's not to justify any act of violence, but violence breeds violence. And what happens in Jenin is the best sergeant recruiter to radical movement among the Palestinians and not to the peace camp.
Israel's government says that this use of heavy armored vehicles, bringing in the military in such big numbers into that Palestinian camp in Jenin is justified because there are militants there. They have to get out. Your thoughts, Yossi Mekelberg?
Well, there are militant groups because there is no peace, and these young people, it's again not to justify any act of violence, and you don't want to see, but one need to ask what are the root causes of all of it. Why young people, instead of looking for a bright future, because there is none if you live in Jenin, are armed themselves, and because they, on the one hand, they are fed up with the occupation and the oppression. They are completely in despair from their own government, and that becomes, the PA more authoritarian and corrupt, the division between the Hamas and the Fatah. So they don't see any outlet of that. So that's what they do. They don't have a plan. You see that actually they don't even train to fight. It's very sporadic. And it creates a security situation for Israel that it responds. And I think, as most cases, Israel over-respond and disproportionately. But the day after this military operation comes to an end, it won't go towards a diplomatic solution. It's just more oppression. And this is not going to solve the situation because it hasn't for 56 years since 1967.
Irris Makler, let me ask you, Jenin has been on people's radars ever since the Netanyahu government came in. We remember that it was covering an operation in Jenin that the Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was killed. Why Jenin?
That's a good question. Why the north of the West Bank? I mean, if you go back to 2002, there was that huge Israeli operation in Jenin. Much of this same refugee camp ended being dug up then and destroyed. And then, I remember Yasser Arafat calling it Jeningrad based on the heroism of Stalingrad during World War II. So there are fewer settlers living around them. It is a more self-contained community, and there is a history there of this resistance which is strong.
At the same time, Yossi Mekelberg, with the government in power right now, what are the options faced with the determination in Jenin?
Well, I'm sure with having, this is the most right-wing government in Israeli history. And you have a representative of the settlers at the heart of this government, while the Prime Minister is in its weakest point because of his corruption trials. So more and more he's doing what people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich basically exerting pressure on him to do. And settlements are expanding, which again tells the Palestinians there is no chance of a viable Palestinian state. The West Bank is de facto gradually annexed to Israel, and this breeds the kind of armed groups that we mentioned earlier, because they don't see an horizon of peace in which their political, human, and civil rights can be fulfilled. And this is the heart of it. But I think the international community should take responsibility too, because all what they come with is some hollow words of concern or condemnation, but they don't do anything practical to end this situation.
They don't do anything practical. We heard, for instance, the German Chancellor calling on Israel to employ a measured response, Yossi Mekelberg. It's one of the few reactions of pushback that we have seen this Tuesday. Your thoughts?
Well, we heard these things, but again, when the Israeli government announced last week on more than 5,000 building new 5,000 housing units, again, different government talk about concern, but rather, if governments wants to stop it, come from Washington or Brussels or London and any other capitals, they want to bring an end to this expansion of settlements, which symbolizes more than anything that Israel is not serious about this two-state solution or any other peaceful solution. They can do more than words.
And would you level the same criticism at Arab states that have normalized relations with Israel?
Correct. I think they're in maybe this is the time for a peace initiative that is originated in the Middle East. There was one in 2002, mind you, that Israel rejected at the time, but go back to the peace initiative that was originally initiated in Riyadh by Saudi Arabia, and I think to go exactly to where it was, normalization for full peace. It's not only for the Palestinians. Israel needs peace, because see what happens in the last 6 months, how the anti-democratic forces there try to destroy democracy. And as much as the protesters try to ignore the link between the occupation and the anti-democratic drive, they are closely linked.
Closely linked, Irris Makler, and there is a domestic reaction. We saw it on Monday with that big demonstration at Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion airport. How big are the demonstrations today, though?
Today isn't a demonstration day. There was criticism of them for proceeding with the demonstrations while there was this military operation in Jenin, and they said if you stop the legislation, which was going ahead at full pelt in the Knesset in Israel's parliament on the same day, if you stop that, we won't hold a demonstration. But the Knesset, nothing stops the legislative process, it seems, and so they said, well, then we're going ahead. And it was quite it was a ferocious demonstration, I would say, with a ferocious police response. yesterday at Israel's airport. And I think it's worth noting that this demonstration, that this protest, 6 months of it now, is what has actually put the process on pause. And if you believe Netanyahu when he speaks in English, doesn't always say exactly the same thing when he speaks in Hebrew, Israel's Prime Minister, but if you believe him when he speaks in English, it's the only ameliorating factor, and it's going to change things slightly.
And what's the end game? The end of the parliamentary session? What happens next, Irris?
What happens is that they want to pass this first part. In Hebrew, in Israel, they call it the salami method. If you can't get it passed all at once, then you do it bit by bit. You chop it up and do it bit by bit like a salami. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get the first part of these laws passed now during this session of Israel's parliament just before the summer. It's now going into summer recess. They've got 3 weeks and they're going hell for leather to pass everything they can. Quite controversial laws, not directly linked to judicial reform, being stuffed into other laws, all of this all together in this 3-week process, so they can say we've done step one and tell their right-wing voters that they're on track.
Yossi Mekelberg, is it inevitable?
No, I think the protesters made their opinion very clearly that they are not going to stop demonstrating and protesting everywhere, and they use, of course, legal means to stop this legislation, because they know, as everyone else knows, that if this legislation passed, it's not just controversial, it's the end of Israel democracy as we know it. When you weaken the judiciary, and while especially in a parliamentary system in which anyway the majority within the legislature supports the executive, you end with no checks and balances. And the separation of power became, at the end of the day, hollow. It ends with the government and the executive decide what they want to do. And when we see this kind of government, whether it's in the West Bank and religious legislation, other legislations within Israel, we know the direction is into a more authoritarian country.
Yossi Mekelberg, many thanks for joining us from London. I want to thank our Jerusalem correspondent, Irris Makler.